Okay, we're back. Early in the morning, check. Everyone sleeping, check. Unprofessional philosopher, check. Holy moly. Okay, so it is early in the morning and we are creeping around looking at philosophy videos. So we were admiring Block's tie and philosophical acumen yesterday. So we're going to pick up sort of here. I kind of remember that at this point in the discussion, I think he starts asking about identity theories and reduction and elimination. In fact, I think when I first wrote about this, when I first watched this so many years ago, in fact, when I looked it up, I found out it was 2010. So this is my blog over here. This picture I have on my blog, no one likes it, but there's a picture of me right before I was giving my talk at the big stage at Tucson. I was extremely nervous, so that's why that's there. That's how I look when I'm on stage. Anyway, so this was May 5th, 2010. Holy moly, that's a long time ago, like 14 years ago, almost 14. Uh, yeah, pretty much. Okay, so and it was based on this video that we have over here. In particular, I think it was this part. So maybe we'll watch this little bit of it, and then we'll see if I change my mind or at all about what I wrote way back then. In case anyone cares, you can find my blog at Philosophy Sucks. It's on my website. Um, but probably that's old news. I mean, remember blogs? Holy moly, man. Okay, so what are we doing? Oh yeah, listening to block. Still haven't confirmed a date for him to come on Consciousness Live, but I'm hoping to have a discussion with him about that shortly. So we should hope for some updates in the near future.
Um,
Huh?
Paradoxical because of the vividness of its apparent meaning.
Yes, paradoxical because of the vividness of its apparent meaning. I like that quote. That's what we were talking about yesterday, but he's talking about the inverted spectrum there because the idea that your red could be my green, etc., has a kind of vivid first person sense of like we can make sense of it. He thinks it's paradoxical because we can seemingly make sense of it, but we couldn't like picture any empirical test that would differentiate between a case where that was and wasn't. So in what sense can we make sense of it if we can't specify some behavior or something that would be different about the world? That's the source of the paradoxical nature of it, I think. Okay, very cool.
I see. Well, let me follow that with another question that is similar in that it has to do with the relation between behaviorism and physicalism in the sense of the physiological identification of mental states.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So that's how the first question had to do with behaviorism and physicalism, because he was trying to press Quine to admit that there is something called the subjective experience, an internal state, which we can make sense of as being swapped. Bloch's limited notion of the swapping is that it's like behaviorally detectable, but it's just the brain state in me is the one when I see red, is in you the one when you see green, the brain states. And in fact, I think Bloch even talks about this a real life example of a pseudo normal color vision, which is a rare case where the genes at the genetic level are swapped or something like that, so that you're red. So in me, the red photoreceptor in you, in a pseudo normal vision person, has that replaced with the green one. The red and green are swapped, or the long and medium or whatever wavelength receptors are swapped genetically. There may be a real life case of this.
Only this one moves to the cognitive arena. Suppose that we had two computers which compute the same arithmetical problems in the same amount of time. So they have exactly this, they're behaviorally identical. But one makes the computations by translating the decimal inputs into binary, doing the computation in binary, and then translating back into decimal and giving you the output as so that in a way that we can read it. The other one does the same thing, except it translates into octal and does the computation in octal. So we have two computers with the same, which are behaviorally identical.
Okay, so one is binary using ones and zeros. The other's octal using 8 is octal. I remember there was hexadecimal, octal. So there's lots of bases. You can pick any base number system and then build your numbers on it. We use base 10, obviously. Binary is base 2 and used in computer science. Okay, so you get the idea is that the behaviorally the same, but internal states are distinct. Therefore, when they wanted to went to an explanation, when we wanted to try to explain what these systems were doing, we would be missing something if we only talk about stimulus and response. We'd be missing the difference in the internal processing components, I guess. Okay, this is not the question I thought he was going to ask right after this, but okay, interesting.
But physically speaking, different things are going on inside. Now, mightn't it be that the same could be true for two thinking organisms, either a person and a Martian, or a person, a human and a computer, so that the behavioral net would fail to capture some of the meaningful cognitive states on the inside?
Yes. This was pretty much my point, I think, in the opening pages of Word and Object, in my analogy of the bushes that had been trimmed in the shape of elephants.
I still to this day use this bushes trimmed in the shape of elephants metaphor when talking about this stuff in my psychology class. I forgot I got that from Quine.
And identical shapes, but random variation in their internal structure. The internal structure.
Yeah, exactly. And the basic point is that if you tried to study the internal structure as an answer to the question, why does it have that shape, you'd be missing all the interesting things, the real explanatory. I mean, obviously, the internal structure of the bush is necessary in some sense for the shape to be there, but it's not the explanation of the shape.
Respond to what was going on in the nervous system, but they've been, our behavior has been whipped into shape by social pressures and trimmed the way these bushes have been trimmed from the outside, equally from the outside. But these are no longer, these internal differences are of course not anything like these enigmatic ones having to do with inverted spectrum. These are differences in the neural mechanism itself. There'll be differences also in the history. One speaker has acquired this aspect of his linguistic behavior earlier than that aspect. His communicant has learned those two aspects the other way around. So, and this brings out the fact that the full explanation of linguistic behavior is not to be found in the behavior, it's to be found in the nervous system. But my point about behaviorism in linguistics is that those further mechanistic explanations, which we certainly want for full understanding of the situation, are immaterial to the linguistic output.
Right. So this is a very interesting point. So yes, we want an explanation ultimately of how this stuff is happening in terms of what the nervous system is doing, just like a full explanation for the shape of the bush, why it's that way, is going to include how the plant grew and what kind of plant it is, I guess. But that's not an answer to the question, why does it have that shape that it does? So studying that stuff is important. And for the full explanation, that's where that's what the explanation, like you just, I guess what's his point? If you just describe the shape of the internal branching structure of these bushes, you would arrive at the shape, but you would be missing the influences which caused it to be that way for the so-called output. The analogy is that the linguistic output is the shape. So the explanation for that are the social pressures, the environment, the context, etc. That's Quine's point, I think. So he's not trying to say that the internal states don't matter, but he's trying to say that as far as the explanation for why the thing is behaving in the way that it does, you don't get it at that level. Well, I mean, there's nothing more. So it's hard to put at this point. You do get an explanation because he says ultimately that's where it bottoms out. But you're missing something if that's all you're looking at. I guess that's the way I put it. Huh.
Study of it as such.
Wait,
I
so
think
go back.
full understanding of the situation are immaterial to the linguistic output, to the study of it as such.
To the study. So if you want to study the shape as the shape, you wouldn't study the internal branching structure. That's the idea.
I think many people find it fairly plausible that there should be a correlation between mental states, such as the state of being in pain, and neurological states. But they find it implausible that such states should be identical to one another. The state of being in pain should be exactly the same thing as some neurological state. I wanted to ask you about this. Perhaps one of the things bothering people who have this intuition that the identity, so that an identity theory here would be counterintuitive, is this, that we feel in general that facts of identity aren't susceptible to explanation. So you can't explain why the morning star is identical to the evening star. It is. You simply is. You can't explain why water is H2O. So that if indeed the state of pain were identical to some neurological state, N, say, it wouldn't make sense to ask why these states or events are identical to one another. But, and here's the supposed problem, one would want to ask why it is that this neurologically described state should give rise to this particular feeling rather than some other feeling. Why pain rather than, why does it produce pain rather than happiness, for example? So the question is,
Early formulation of the hard problem from Paul Horwich. Interesting. I mean, this is why the hard problem kind of caught on when Chalmers came out and gave that talk, and why it became so popular, because people already had this idea. So, yeah, and I like this point because I think generally there are two overarching, like, philosophy of science approaches, maybe more too, but at least two, towards thinking about identity. So one is this way of thinking that Horwich is talking about, which is, I think, Block comes from Block, or at least Block's friendly to it, and I'm also friendly to it. The idea that identities don't get explained; they're postulated to give explanations of other things. The other view about identity is that they're somehow deduced from, in a kind of, this is kind of the David Lewis inspired version of things. You start with a kind of functional analysis. Water is the stuff that plays a certain role, falls from the skies, it's clear and odorless, etc. Then you do some science. The clear and odorless stuff is H2O, and then you make a deduction. Water is H2O, so that there is a kind of explanation for why water is H2O. H2O is the stuff that's playing this role that we identified in this way as the watery role. So on one camp, the identity gets no explanation, and on the other camp, it's kind of a deduction from, in this way, from a two-step deduction from a kind of functionally defined thing, and then an empirically discovered what does the function, and then a deduction. So, okay. I kind of like both views. Chalmers' view is more in line with the second, and so when I argue with people like that, I tend to adopt that, and some days I'm fine with that, but on other days, this way of identity, thinking about identity, I think is really the more in line with the way science is maybe practiced. So, okay, let's continue to see what Quine says.
whether then the fact that a demand for explanation seems to be in order in a case like this, whether that casts any doubt on the identity.
Right. So the idea is that, so his question is that typically in identity statements we don't want an explanation, but here we do. I don't know. Don't we want one for water? Like, why is water H2O? Is a question that the other side seemingly can answer. If you buy all that stuff about a priori deduction, okay. So is this any reason to cast doubt on the identity? Big time heart problem stuff here. Okay.
Theory.
The ground for maintaining the identity would be that all observational evidence for the theory, for our overall theory, would remain undisturbed by identifying these, or what comes to the same thing again would, in that respect, that is to say, the evidence would still remain undisturbed. If instead of identifying them, one settled for the neural structures and simply disavowed the mental. Or I think it's only a verbal difference whether you're disavowing the mental or whether you're identifying it with the physical. Partly this
quote that triggered me for my blog post that I mentioned earlier, this one that we have over here, reduction versus elimination. So I thought it was actually Block who asked that question, but it was Horwich. Follow up. Okay, so only a verbal difference between reduction and elimination. That's interesting. So if you have a certain, say, something like a pain, and you identify it with a brain state, he's saying it's a semantic difference, only verbal, whether you want to say that you reduced the pain to the brain state, or whether you want to say you eliminated the pain. I just don't agree with this. I don't think it's a verbal difference, but I think that this brings out the distinction, which people, type B physicalists like Block, develop later on, between what they call a causal reduction and a semantic or theory reduction. So if you could do the a priori linking thing, water, pain is this stuff. The stuff that does that is brain state X. So pain is brain state X. You would have this kind of deduction, which would allow you to identify it. But if you can't do that, which people generally think you can't, although I'm skeptical, as you know, if you know me, but whatever. So if you can't do that, you can still give what Block would call a causal reduction, which is to sort of somehow show that the causal powers of this thing are nothing but the physical powers, and show that really there's only one thing there, the brain state, which is the pain or whatever, but you don't eliminate it. So I think that's an important move, that you can't eliminate the thing. And you can't reduce one thing to itself. If there's only one thing there, it's just that one thing. Now, if we have two different words for that one thing, then maybe you could eliminate the word. So if you really didn't want to use the word pain, I mean, I saw a sticker once what it said H2O Polo on someone's car. Okay, so H2O was replacing the word water there. Clever, clever. Could we do that systematically and generally? And never talk about water, but only talk about H2O in its various states? Maybe. But would we have eliminated water? No, it's still out there. It's still the same. Did we reduce one thing to another? Well, no, there's just water. It's that stuff out there, which is H2O. So whether we can use the terms or not, whether we need them is more of a practical issue. What's really there, though, is not. So I do think that this issue, it has to be clearly pointed out that we're talking about theories and semantic relations between them on the one hand versus like what's there and how to think about it on the other hand. So I don't think it's a semantic difference between elimination and reduction. What it's talking about what's there, even though it may be a semantic difference when you're talking about which words to use. which obviously a matter of semantics. So I would disagree with this.
Of a piece with the more general argument about the indeterminacy of reference, and the way you can shuffle the values of the variables, the denote data, without disturbing the truth values of the sentences or their relation to empirical evidence. That being the case, then mere considerations of economy would count in favor of the step in question. That step in question being, in turn, describable in either of two ways, namely abolition of the mental or physicalization of the mental.
So you don't regard it as an argument against taking this step, that it precludes the possibility of explanation where we feel intuitively some explanation is called for?
Well, it's hard to think what such an explanation would consist in. Once you've, to your satisfaction, worked out the whole neural mechanism behind what subjects report as painful, you have the whole story. From an empirical point of view, what could be added?
What could be added is an explanation for the feeling itself.
Wow. So this is hardcore. So Quine is an illusionist, obviously, right? He OG championed illusionism, and he said in the last part of the video that he was basically on board with what Dan Dennett says, that heterophenomenology is the best you can give when it comes to consciousness. So one picks up strong vibes of illusionism from Quine. So this is the move that they make. Once you explain the entire physical nervous system, then what else could you do? And I think Horwich is right. Well, you want maybe an explanation for why that thing is that way. Like, why is pain associated with that brain state as opposed to a different one? That's a classic hard problem way of putting the issue of consciousness. So to say, well, we don't need to do that is kind of a, I don't want to say sleazy, but it's like, I don't know. I don't like it. Underhand.
Not simply an explanation for a person saying, I am now in pain.
Well, now, what about that? That is something that should be subject to explanation.
Okay.
Namely, when the person reports this feeling, when a person says just the sort of thing you've been saying, you've done something physical, and in principle, there's something that would admit of explanation in terms of what was going on in your nervous system while you were doing that, and what some of the more remote causes had been in terms of through your previous experiences, which is to say your previous exposures to stimulation.
Thank you.
And that's where I would place that as by way of classifying.
Can I ask something else about this? Is it possible, I agree with you that we do not have any idea of how the physical facts about the brain could explain why it is that a certain brain state feels one way rather than another. We have no idea, but is it possible that at a later date, neuroscientists may have such an idea? That is, the reason we can't imagine how to do this is because we don't have the conceptual apparatus that neuroscientists will one day have. And so, in a way, it's failure of imagination on our part that we can't see how this explanation could go.
Classic statement of type C physicalism. So type A, we can already see how to do it. These a priori deductions from like something like functional description. Type B, we'll never be able to see how to do that, but that's still mind-brain identity or something like it is true. And type C is this like, we can't, it's too soon. So everyone wants to be a type C physicalist according to Chalmers, but the problem is that it sort of collapses into one or the other. It's hard to see what else there could be besides some future functionalism or some future mind-brain identityism. So Of course, we can't see what future advancement would make us change our mind in the same way that Aristotle couldn't anticipate how chemistry would unfold so as to convince us that it's obvious that water has parts. Okay.
What, what I'm finding difficult is picturing how, when this new revelation comes, or new discovery, new breakthrough, how we would know we had it.
So how would we know we had this breakthrough? How would we know that we had it? Yeah. It's funny. I just realized this is 30 years ago. We're dealing with the same fucking problems here, dude. Okay, so that's a good question. How would we know that we had it? So if we got some breakthrough that would allow us to give this explanation, we would know that we had it by giving the explanation. Yeah, okay. Because what else could be added to our story is basically what he's trying to ask, I guess, if we really had a full physical explanation.
How would we know that? Yes, so this is the difference, because actually this person is having the redness sensation where I'm having the green one. I can't picture on what basis we could link any kind of physical discovery with that.
You say we wouldn't be able to explain it, but of course you allow that we could have evidence that would be sufficient to identify my sensation of red with the sensation I get when I see something red with a certain neural state. And we could have evidence to identify the sensation you get when you see something green with a certain neural state in your head. But then what if those turned out to be the same neural state? The one you get when you see green is exactly the same as the one I get when I see red. Now, if you're willing to identify each of those sensory experiences with the neural state, then the fact that the one I get when I see red is the same as the one you get when you see green ought to seem to you, as far as I can see, you ought to say that that would be evidence for an inverted spectrum.
Yeah, but not without undetectability. So this must be the part where Bloch says he gets Quine to agree to this. Because he has it on his website. He says, I got Quine to agree to a limited version of an inverted spectrum. And the reason that's important for Bloch, as we mentioned already in the previous video, is because he thinks it's the thin edge of a wedge, that if you get someone to admit that, then you can work your way towards a full version of inversion, which I think is an interesting and good argument.
Very good. Here, this strikes
Very
me.
good. So we got him. Look at this, is the man thinking face. So this might be the first time he actually has to think on his feet here in these questions. But yeah, so I thought this was what Bloch asked already in the first question that he asked, but maybe Quine didn't quite pick up that he was trying to get him in this position where, yeah, so if we have a reason to believe that the sensation I have when I see red is identified with brain state X, and then we find out that brain state X is the very same one in you that shows up when you see green, then given our reason to identify them, shouldn't we say there's a kind of inversion here that my green is your red? So let's see what Quine says.
The moment anyway is
Hold on,
here.
Spectrum.
Very good. Here, this strikes me at the moment anyway as a good way of devising an explication for what up to this point we haven't been able to assign any meaning to, and this is meaningful, and that would be yes, that would be very nice. And here we've got what has seemed to be an empty phrase, just standing off there at the side on the shelf, waiting to be filled, and here's a filling that just goes nicely into it.
So you're friendly enough to introspection so that if we could assign an empirical meaning to the inverted spectrum, you'd be willing to countenance it as a meaningful claim.
Yes, and this would be a matter of rescuing something from that dismal mentalistic realm and giving it some, well, to change the metaphor, giving it some respectability.
I don't see how introspection enters into it, though. Why do you say...
Wait, what was that?
Well,
Paul said something.
Change the metaphor, giving it some respectability.
I don't see how introspection enters into it, though.
I don't see how introspection...
The metaphor, giving it some respectability.
I don't see how introspection enters into it, though. Why do you say that Professor Quine is friendly enough to introspection to agree with this? Introspection isn't involved.
Well, I guess the introspection is involved in that when you say, I'm having a sensation of red now, and it turns out there's always the same brain state going on.
Yeah, so there's the introspective report. Oh, it's quite hilarious. Yeah, so introspection is required to say you're having the red experience now, as opposed to looking at the red stimulus now. How do you know you're seeing red as opposed to something else, I guess, is the claim that Block is making.
But what's important is you're saying certain things and you're looking at certain things that we can all see to be red. That's being correlated with a certain brain state. And one doesn't really have to rely on introspective evidence, I think, to reach the conclusion that...
In the conclusion, no, and that's the beauty of it, I'd say. That we start out with the problem in introspective terms, but it turns out, well, it's just a matter of this person having the same neural state when he looks at a live lobster as the other person does after the lobster's been broiled and changed from green to red.
Good example.
So, as far as you're concerned,
It's a sad example, poor lobsters, but yeah. So the idea still doesn't seem to me to answer this question: is that the person are they having? So the person who's having the brain state that in me would be associated with green, when they look at the red thing, are they experiencing red or green? And I don't think Quine's going to allow that. That's a meaningful question. And they're going to say they're having what we would call green sensation, or if they're a typical member. Is this Martian pain, mad pain kind of issue? Are they typical in the population? Yeah, okay, lots of stuff to think about here. Let's see if we'll follow this up. I might be running out of time here, but we'll have to come back.
the inverted spectrum is a meaningful hypothesis relative to this sort of neural instantiation of it.
Yes, yes, yes. That looks all right to me.
Professor Quine, I'd like to ask you to...
Okay, so this is exactly where he got him. And then this shows up later in the Qualia and Wittgenstein paper. Okay, interesting. I do think that once you allow this of any kind, and I don't really think that Quine did allow that the sensations would be switched. He just allowed the brain states would be switched. But if all the behaviors, maybe this is why Bloch later allowed that people could even say, like, it looks green to me, or it used to, because what was that in the Wittgenstein paper? He goes through a series of changes. So the first stage is this stage where you have, I'm looking at the red thing, and in me brain state X is produced, and you're looking at the red thing, and in you brain state opposite of X is produced, one that would be my green state. Okay, so that's the first stage. Wonderful. Then we invert them so their words come to change their meaning or something like that. And then they get amnesia, so they forget how things used to appear. So first they go around saying, oh, the grass looks red, it used to be green. Then they gradually come to forget that. And now the grass just looks red. And they forgot that it used to look green. Now they're true color inverts in this way. And we got there by, I'm not doing justice to the steps here, but I think the kind of crucial assumption, the starting place assumption here, is that when the brain states are switched, the experiences are switched. So that if you really had a case where the brain state that was for green in me was in you, when you looked at red things, that you would say, oh, it looks green. Yeah. That's not something that Quine agreed to here, by the way. Huh, interesting. Okay, well, we are running up on get the limits of what I can do this morning. I'm already hearing I'm not so sneaking around anymore, so I gotta go attend to real life. But well, I think Martin Davies was just about to ask a question, so we'll come back for more Quine.